Thank you very much for joining us today. We are excited to bring to you the 25th webinar of Energy Evaluation Asia Pacific, focusing on the topic of insights from International Energy Agency's 2025 Energy Efficiency Report and Energy Efficiency Progress Tracker. My name is Nazir. I'm your host for today's webinar and a coordinator with Energy Evaluation Asia Pacific, which is a community of energy and evaluation professionals across the Asia Pacific region. As I said, this session is being recorded, and we would like to welcome you to kindly introduce yourself in the chat, sharing your name, your organization, and the country you are joining us from. And a quick icebreaker. What is one thing in your home or office that you suspect is working hard at wasting energy? So you can share your responses in the chat. While you are doing that, I would like to share with you quick housekeeping rules. As I said, this session is being recorded, and by attending and participating, we assume you give your consent for this to happen. But if you have any concern, feel free to reach out to us. I would like to request you to keep your microphones muted when you're not speaking, but you can switch on your cameras for better engagement. You can use the chat box option for putting your questions. The speakers may respond to the questions at the end, or they may directly respond in the chat. We have a dedicated Q&A and discussion session at the end where we will take your questions and we will have more detailed discussion. We will be sharing with you the webinar recording on our YouTube channel, but through emails and on our website and LinkedIn page. We will also be sharing with you the session notes along with the slide through email, but also through our website. The agenda for today's session look like this. We will start with welcome remarks and context setting from Edward Wine, who is member of Energy Evaluation Asia Pacific Steering Committee. Then we will have presentation from two of our speakers from International Energy Agency, Lucas, who will be sharing with us the IEA's 2025 Energy Efficiency Report, and Renee Stephens. She will be talking about the Energy Efficiency Progress Tracker. We will have around 15 minutes of discussion, and then we will close the session around 7 p.m. Without further ado, let me hand it over to Ed. Ed, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Great. So thank you very much, Nazir. I just wanted to spend a few minutes on Energy Evaluation Asia Pacific. As you can see, it's a community practice specializing in energy evaluation across the whole Asia Pacific region. It was a nonprofit established in 2018. It's modeled after the one in the United States, which has been going on since 1983. And then later we created one in Europe, i.e. PPEC, which has been going on in the even years since 2010. And its mission is to take a leadership role in expanding the practice of and a capacity for what we call objective evaluation in the energy efficiency and renewable energy program and policy arena. We have different strategies on our role. We really are focusing on developing resources and professional expertise to answer complex questions related to energy, including what actions pay off, how can energy programs and policies be improved, and what actions can be scaled up. As many of you know, for both the energy efficiency, renewable energy arena, we start small and then we try to build up. And what we want to do is foster the development of self-sustaining evaluation communities through workshops, conferences, webinars, and other tools. The focus is on a collaborative approach, working with different stakeholders, NGOs, research institutions, industry partners, and so on. And we want to focus on robust evaluation and data analysis to inform these key actors. And therefore, we focus on capacity building initiatives for these people through training, workshops, knowledge sharing platforms, etc. And we prioritize post implementation monitoring and evaluation rather than before a program or policy takes into effect. So we can track the outcomes and impacts and then report back so that people can then refine their policies and programs. Our organizational structure, we have a steering committee, an advisory committee, and our coordinator, who is Nazir. Why evaluation? I've included this because a colleague of mine has been recently wrote about this. Juha was formerly the director of the Independent Evaluation Office of the Global Environment Facility. And I thought this quote was really important, so I've been repeating this for this year. So at a moment when societies face unprecedented technological and environmental risks, the role of science has never been more critical. From climate change to artificial intelligence, evidence-based decision making is indispensable. Yet public trust in science is eroding and political support for scientific institutions is weakening. This paradox threatens not only effective policymaking, but the long-term capacity of societies to anticipate, adapt, and innovate. So evaluation is now more important than ever. Again, the three areas that we've been focusing on is policy adoption and implementation, behavioral change, this is just not a technical issue, solution wise, and then economic and environmental benefits, not just the energy savings or energy production, but economic and environmental benefits have an important role to play, particularly if you're talking about air quality or climate change mitigation and even job creation. We try to work with as many people as we can. The webinars, as you can realize, that it's just one part of what we do. We also send out other information, newsletters, and alerts through our mailing list, through LinkedIn. We have a YouTube channel. And once, for example, this webinar is over, it'll be made available. We have, I think this is our 25th or something like that. We have 25 of them. And of course, we have our main website, energy-evaluation.org. Today's webinar is focusing on what the International Energy Agency is doing. And as some of you may have seen in my communication, the IEA has been a very strong supporter of energy evaluation Asia Pacific. Even from day one, I would even say before day one. Um, we had a workshop in Paris at the IEA to see who would be interested in Asia in working on an organization to promote evaluation in the energy world. And that was our starting point. And we went on from there. And we've had IEA personnel talk at our conference, and we've had people like Renee who talked last year on a webinar. So we're very pleased that we were able to have IEA participate today with Renee and Lucas. Uh, they're going to be talking about their 2025 report and also their progress tracker. And from what I understand, we're going to have Lucas talk first, and then Renee will follow up with that. I'm going to stop sharing now, but before they talk, I'll have an introduction, if I can find that, of both. There we
Right here.
go. So, Lucas is an energy efficiency analyst at the IEA, where he contributes to the agency's flagship analysis on energy efficiency, markets, policy progress, and tracking. And he's been really involved in the IEA's annual energy efficiency reporting and tracking tools, supporting government and stakeholders with data-driven insights on progress and priorities. Before joining the IEA, he worked as a senior policy advisor on energy efficiency for the government of the Netherlands. And then after his introduction, he'll actually his presentation, I should say, he'll hand it over to Renee, who's also a policy analyst at the IEA, and um, she contributes to IEA analysis and engagement on energy efficiency trends and implementation, including work relating to the energy efficiency report series and related tracking tools. And I think I'll stop here and hand it over to Lucas. Lucas, you can share your screen and start the talk.
Thank you very much for that very nice introduction and the nice words about the IEA. And thank you for giving us the opportunity to share some of our work, because I think it's a great opportunity to talk to all of you, and also hopefully at the end of the presentation hear a little bit from the audience to see what your thoughts are in the field of energy efficiency and any suggestions that you might have for us, because those are very, very welcome. Maybe I'll start with the icebreaker question. I thought it was a nice question. Here in Paris, unfortunately, I think most energy in my apartment at least is wasted on heating, because unfortunately the insulation in my apartment is quite terrible in Paris. So if anyone has good solutions for that, I'm open to suggestions. Moving on then to the presentation itself. The coming 20 to 30 minutes, Renee and I will talk to you a little bit about our latest report, Energy Efficiency 2025, that came out at the end of last year. Some recent trends that we see here at the IEA in energy efficiency globally, and also explain a bit about our energy efficiency progress tracker, which is an innovation that we added to the website a couple of years ago. And Renee will show you a demonstration of how the tracker works and everything that we've done in that regard. Starting then with some global trends in energy efficiency. And the way we measure energy efficiency here at the IEA is using the indicator of the change in primary energy intensity, both globally and for individual countries. And that means that if countries or regions or the world uses less energy to produce the same amount of outputs, it's becoming more efficient. So a decrease in energy intensity is an improvement in energy efficiency. And if we look at this indicator of energy intensity in recent years, we see quite some change globally. At the beginning of this decade, driven by the COVID-19 crisis in 2020 and 2021, we can see sort of muted energy efficiency progress below 1% each year globally in 2020 and 2021. And then in 2022, partly driven by the effects of the global energy crisis and the high energy prices that consumers and businesses felt, energy efficiency progress jumped to over 2% in 2022. And since then, in 2023 and 2024, fell back a little bit to around 1% last year in 2024. However, we see that for 2025, there's a real uptick in progress again to around 1.8%, according to our latest estimates in 2025. So a real jumping progress, almost reaching that 2% improvement rate that was reached before in 2022 as well. Of course, the interesting question is then what regions are driving the change in 2025 specifically, and that's also something that we've explored in the report. And I think one thing that's interesting to note, especially for this audience, is that for a large part, the improvements that we see globally in 2025 is driven by several key regions in the Asia Pacific region, starting with China. We see that on average, China this decade had an energy efficiency progress annually of below 2%. But then in 2025, we see that jump to over almost 3.5%, 4% in China. So a real jump in China in 2025. An even bigger jump we can see in India in 2025 compared to average progress in India this decade so far, from around 1.5% so far this decade on average to over 4% in 2025. And then lastly, also in the ASEAN countries in Southeast Asia, we see an increase in progress in 2025 compared to the average this decade, to almost 2% in 2025. And as a result, global progress is higher in 2025 than it is on average this decade, which is a positive sign when it comes to energy efficiency. We've also then looked at the policy side of things, the things that governments can do to accelerate energy efficiency progress. And we see that in 2025, there have been over 250 new or updated energy efficiency related policies implemented by governments all around the world. So you can see different regions listed here. And we see, for example, in the Asia Pacific region, together with Southeast Asia, around 50 policies, 50 new or updated policies in Asia Pacific region, across a range of different sectors. So there are new or updated policies in the building sector, in industry and transport, but also many new appliance policies, which is very positive for efficiency progress in the region. So that's a very nice sign. Just to give you a few examples of what are these policies, what can you think of? For example, Australia increased its funding for Clean Energy Finance Corporation by over $1 billion, including for energy efficiency. China released an action plan to promote efficient heat pumps, for example. Electric vehicles were promoted in Korea and Malaysia. And in Vietnam, there is an amendment to the energy efficiency and conservation law in 2025. So you can really see policy action happening in many different countries around the world in a range of different sectors, which is nice to see. And then if we zoom back a bit on where energy efficiency stands globally, we see that there's been increased attention for the topic of energy efficiency at an international stage. And in that sense, COP28 in 2023, the end of 2023 in Dubai, was a real historic milestone for energy efficiency, because countries around the world there came together to agree to double the global average annual rate of energy efficiency improvements by 2030. Average progress up until then, in the decade before, had been around 2% per year, and also in 2022 was around 2% per year improvement. So a doubling would involve an increase to around 4% per year by 2030 in this primary energy intensity change. So a real milestone for energy efficiency in 2023. And then it's interesting to look at what has progress in terms of energy efficiency done over the longer term time horizons. And if we compare the different decades since the beginning of the century, we see that in the first decades, between 2000 and 2009, we see efficiency progress just above 1% per year on average. And then that nearly doubled in the decade afterwards, from 2010 to 2019 to around 2% per year. But since then, rather than doubling again to that 4% level, we see that average efficiency progress since 2019 has slowed down somewhat to around 1.3% per year on average. However, having said that, there are some positive signs for 2025 with the 1.8% that I mentioned before. However, as of yet, the world is not on track to reach that COP28 doubling target that you see on the right-hand side. So then the question is, why has progress not been faster this decade if there is so much policy activity happening? And I'll outline two different reasons here. In the report, we explore more of them, so you can check out the entire explanation in the report, but I'll highlight two of them here. The first one is industry, the industrial sector. And what we see is that since 2019, 2/3 of energy demand growth has happened in the industrial sector. And it's very different from what's happening before. So in this picture, you see the total energy demand growth between 2010 and 2019, previous decade again. And you'll see that it's roughly split evenly between buildings, industry, and transport. Slightly more in transport, slightly less in buildings, but roughly a split of 1/3 contribution to total energy demand growth. And then when we look in recent years, since 2019 to 2024, you can see that this has really shifted towards the industrial sector. 2/3 coming from industry and a lot less contribution from buildings and transport when it comes to energy demand growth in those years. And why is that relevant for overall energy intensity progress? Well, because at the same time in this industrial sector, we see that intensity progress in industry has fallen. So previous decades, there was an improvement of around 2% per year on average in the industrial sector in particular. And since 2019, that has fallen back to below 0.5%. So that's a real drop in progress, which has its effects on global energy intensity progress as well. So that's the first reason, the industrial sector. The second reason then that we see is the fact that policies in recent years have sort of lagged the technological progress for many different technologies. Here you see examples for lighting, air conditioners, cars, and industrial motors. And the first thing that we've tracked is sort of the world average minimum energy performance standard. So the minimum level that these technologies need to adhere to in terms of efficiency, how has that progressed over the years on average? And we see that there has been improvement. So on average, standards have become more ambitious when it comes to energy efficiency for all of these technologies. However, if we compare that to the rate at which technology has improved, which is the green line shown here, you can see that there's been a stronger acceleration in the progress when it comes to efficiency for the technologies than for the policies. And why is that relevant for what's happening on the ground in the market? Well, that's interesting to then compare to the average product sold. Is that closer to that technological potential? Are people buying the most efficient devices? Or is that closer to that minimum standard that products have to adhere to? And one thing we've seen in our recent report, as shown here, is that many of these average products sold are closer to the minimum requirements than to the technological potential. And that shows the potential that policy has to drive efficiency progress across these different technologies. I'd like to highlight one specific technology here, which is air conditioners, where you can see that this gap between technology and policy is indeed quite large in 2025. And why is that relevant specifically for air conditioners? Well, because at the same time, we see strong growth in air conditioner ownership in many different regions. So in some places, like in the US and Japan, air conditioner ownership in 2010 was already quite high. But in some other regions, like in EU, Korea, China, and India, air conditioner ownership was still quite a bit lower in 2010. And if we compare that to recent years, 2024, we see that in many of these regions on the right-hand side, there's been really strong growth in air conditioner ownership. This is driven in part by the fact that people's incomes have risen, so they can afford access to cooling, but also, of course, the fact that there have been increases in extreme temperatures and heat waves that have been recurring, which have driven up the need or the demand for cooling. And one of the results of this, one of the outcomes is that this increase in air conditioner ownership is the increase in cooling-related electricity demand growth. So what you see here is how much electricity demand growth has increased between 2010 and 2024 as a result of this increased demand for cooling. And you can see that in India, that's over 300% increase in electricity demand. And one thing that we analyze in the report is that had these new air conditioners being sold in recent years, had these been more efficient, efficiency progress overall would have been significantly higher. So that's an area where there is still potential for improvement. So those are some of the reasons of why progress is not faster. But then, of course, the question is, well, how can governments accelerate progress for energy efficiency? And our message there is relatively simple, which is that it requires policy action. And policy action in two distinct ways. The first thing is that governments can raise the ambition of the existing policies that they have. So here you'll see again the technologies that I outlined just now with again that world average minimum energy performance standards. But here also shown down the best maps in class right now around the world. And you'll see that there's a big gap between those as well, meaning that countries can learn from each other and implement policies that are already in place elsewhere around the world that are more ambitious when it comes to energy efficiency to increase progress for these different technologies and sectors. So that's the first way. They can increase this ambition. You can see here there's a wide range for different countries in terms of their ambition level when it comes to their maps. And the second way is the policy gaps that remain to be filled. So step one is increase the ambitions on the policies that you already have. But then step two, maybe logically, is identify for which technologies or which sectors you don't have policies in place yet and try to address those. And when we look at, for example, coverage of, again, those minimum energy performance standards for air conditioners or for refrigerators globally, we see that almost 9 out of 10 of these technologies are covered by some form of standards. However, if we compare that with some other technologies like cooking or dishwashers or washing machines, we can see that sometimes nearly half of these technologies is not yet covered by any form of standards, which really shows the potential there is for governments to implement these policies. The IEA is trying to help policymakers with implementing effective energy efficiency policies, and we've developed an energy efficiency policy toolkit, something some of you might be familiar with, introduced a couple of years ago. And using that toolkit, we try to help governments implement energy efficiency policies across different sectors. So there's a toolkit for buildings, for industry, for appliances, for transport. And in it, we give examples of policies in those specific sectors, whether that's regulatory instruments or grants or subsidies, of policies that we think are effective and that governments can learn from for their own policy mix. And the most effective policy mixes that we see combine these elements into one overarching policy package. So that was in a quite high pace, I realize. Some information on our latest energy efficiency market report. There's a lot of more information available for free on our website. You can find the report there also through this QR code, but you can also just search for energy efficiency 2025 and you'll find it very quickly. And there's a lot more information on specific end use sectors or specific trends that you would like to explore more that I outlined just now. And then lastly, and very importantly, in parallel to the report, we also updated our energy efficiency progress tracker. That's a real innovation that we introduced a couple of years ago, and that's something that Renee now will explain to you in a little bit more detail and show you a demonstration of. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Renee.
Thank you very much, Lucas. And I'll add my thanks to Nazir and Ed as well for setting up our presentation today. It's a real pleasure to be joining you again just about 1 year on. And this year we're lucky to have Lucas with us as well as the lead author on the market report, the Energy Efficiency 2025 report. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. So I would like to talk a little bit about firstly just the tracking of energy efficiency progress, and then introduce you to the tracker tool as has been mentioned already. Lucas, next slide please. So as Lucas mentioned, at COP28 in 2023, nearly 200 governments agreed to double the global average annual rate of energy efficiency progress by 2030. And while the annual energy efficiency reports that we put out provide the global picture in written form, the IEA also has developed this dynamic online dashboard for tracking energy efficiency progress. And so this helps us really to track progress against the COP28 goal, but it's also used for helping to track against the Sustainability Development Goal number 7.3, which also has a global doubling energy intensity goal. So besides this, of course, we know energy efficiency, there's many reasons for advancing progress on this topic. It supports clean energy transitions, competitiveness, economic growth, jobs. It improves energy security and energy affordability. So there's lots of good reasons why we want to be understanding and looking at progress on energy efficiency. And of course, different countries, they have different energy efficiency priorities. They have different contexts and goals and makeups of their economy. So as we're looking at this information, of course, as always, it's worth bearing in mind that one size fits all is never the way with energy efficiency because of this bespoke nature of situations. But across the board, nevertheless, energy efficiency has a role to play and can have a real potential to deliver these multiple benefits across economies. And so here we have a picture of what we mean by energy efficiency progress. And the way that we classify this primarily is in terms of primary energy intensity. And so this is basically the ratio of total primary energy supply to GDP. And this means, so if we're seeing an annual improvement in energy intensity, for example, of 1.8%, like we saw in 2025 globally, then it means for each unit of energy used, we're achieving 1.8% more GDP. And Lucas, if you click one more time, we'll also talk a little about final energy intensity. This is another metric that we use, and this is really helpful for understanding and use energy efficiency progress. And so for this, similarly, but yet differently, we divide the value of the total final consumption by GDP. And so to the next slide, if you're wondering what do we even mean by energy efficiency, this slide can be very helpful and informative. You can see that we group under fuel switching, electrification and renewables, and also clean cooking as mechanisms to contribute to energy efficiency. And then we also have other categories of technical efficiency and avoided demand. And you can also see that there are these sectors to which we apply the definition of energy efficiency, that we see it's possible to achieve energy efficiency, whether that's industry, transport, buildings, or the power systems as a whole. Next slide, please. So the tracker itself, like I said, it's an online, it's a dynamic tool that enables you to explore historical data and the latest market estimates, and also to see those in light of IEA scenarios for energy demand and energy efficiency progress. And so specifically, it provides both the global and the regional picture of primary energy intensity progress and total final consumption. And as you'll see in a moment, the 2025 edition has been modified to include an industry sector module. And so this provides us with insights on industry sector energy intensity and energy consumption. And there are also insights that we'll see that demonstrate country level insights on historical primary energy intensity progress. So all of these can provide different levels of insights. And right now, I will give you a little first-hand view of what that looks like. Thank you. Let me check, I've got the right. There we go. So you should be seeing now the progress tracker. So I won't overwhelm with more interesting insights and statistics, since we've done such a thorough job of that with the market report insights, but just to introduce this to you. So basically we have here an overview, but also a methodology of how we actually put the tracker together. So if you have questions to do with the methodology behind the tracker, you can always dive in and see that information right there. But the tracker essentially provides both global overview and regional trends. And we have economy-wide and industry-wide insights as mentioned. So here, for instance, we can take a look at the global overview, the economy-wide overview, and we can see that there's the primary energy intensity insights here, which go up to our 2025 estimates. And so here, for example, you're seeing the 1.8% overall headline number that Lucas has mentioned already. And you can see, of course, how last decade's energy intensity improvement progress was looking and where we're at so far with this next decade. And so here you'll see we have total energy supply figures as well. So you can see how much energy is actually being utilized. And then we have our final sort of end use focused figures down here. So again, you can look at these changes and nuances of the data. And there's also a narrative that you can explore and really dive into what are the key takeaways as a result of this data, which reiterates many of the findings made in the market report. And so the new module here, the industry sector module, I'll take you through that. So you can see here that we have, again, energy intensity information. This is historical going up to 2023. And really, you can look to these decade figures, the figures from last decade, and really interrogate what's happening since then in this decade, which is quite interesting to see. And what we have is it actually the figures are broken down in terms of both heavy and light industry and use figures here. So we can look at the heavy industry energy consumption figures and also light industry energy consumption figures. And you can really appreciate here the different contributions that they make percentage-wise to overall energy consumption in the industry sector globally, with heavy industry being around that 70% mark and light industry just under 30%. And so then to briefly switch over to the regional trends, this is where you can come and have a look at the different regional level insights. You have Asia Pacific here and a subset of ASEAN also, along with other regions. And again, you can look either at the economy-wide or industry-focused insights. So I'll come back to this top diagram in a moment. But again, just to mention, you can see the current figures here on primary energy intensity just for the region. You can see here, for instance, for 2025, the estimate is showing 3.1% primary energy intensity improvement, annual improvement there, which of course surpasses that global rate and speaks to the importance of the Asia Pacific as a region in what is happening with energy efficiency progress globally. And then also to mention here, this I think is a very, very useful tool on a country level to really take a look and see what the data is telling us. So these are historical figures from 2010 to 2019. These aren't necessarily to the minute, but they provide this really good historical viewpoint and helps when looking at understanding what energy efficiency progress looks on a country level. So you can really see the differences here, for example, in energy intensity, the annual change, but also the absolute figures of energy intensity that has occurred in the various countries and how they differ. And again, they speak to those country-specific contexts and also the scale and potential for opportunities. And lastly, just to demonstrate how this looks in the industry sector, so I really think you can appreciate here the differences when looking at the industry sector compared to the economy-wide figures, and it really does show the different structures of economies coming through there in how industry energy intensity is borne out in the numbers. And including those absolute figures, which do vary quite significantly across the different economies within the Asia Pacific region. So I think I'll stop sharing my screen there, and maybe we'll head back to the presentation, if that's okay. I have just a few more slides to talk through, and as Lucas is just pulling that up, I'll mention that we're busy preparing at the moment for the IEA's 11th annual global conference on energy efficiency. So I wanted to mention this because this is a very important and useful forum for us, and we want to get the word out there. So this time we will have the pleasure of co-hosting with in Montreal, Canada, with Canada's Minister of Energy and Natural Resources, Tim Hodgson. This event is the most significant international event to take place on energy efficiency each year as a very broad topic of energy efficiency at the global level, and the only global ministerial level event focused specifically on advancing energy efficiency. So it goes for 2 days, and the conference will seek to advance the global conversation on energy efficiency as a tool for enhancing energy security, energy affordability, and industrial competitiveness, all while working towards the global goal that we've mentioned several times already. And so while the event is taking place in Canada, participants will, of course, be very global in nature, and we seek to have wide and broad participation. It is, however, having said that, by invitation only, but please do reach out to us if you would like to discuss senior representation from your organization, because we know that there is work being done in many spheres, and we would love to see that represented at this global event. And on to the next slide. So just before opening to questions, you may be contemplating, what does this presentation, everything you've heard today, really mean for energy evaluation? So given the global scope, of course, of the reports and the insights, the insights are primarily quite high level, and they help us understand the varied ways that markets and policies are combining to shape energy efficiency progress, and really the breadth of the policies. And that's across different sectors: industry, transport, buildings, appliances, and power systems, and across policy tools in terms of regulation, information, and incentives. So this is really about giving those headline insights, and also to spark interest in the types of variation in energy efficiency progress and what that looks like and the potential opportunities there. So for instance, we have some insights in the market report this year about the transport sector, and we look at, for example, fuel economy standards and show some different insights there on how that's being applied differently among countries. And then similarly for transport modal shift, where we're looking at bicycle lanes and how different cities are, adopting different, have installed different lengths of bicycle lanes. So it's quite interesting to see the different lenses that you can apply to evaluate the energy efficiency work that is going on. And it's an opportunity for you all to glean some insights and maybe spark some ideas about how you might go about looking in more detail at some of these things and what are the benefits that spin off from them. So we're just beginning to work on developing the 2026 market report, which is shorthand for the Energy Efficiency 2026 report, as you've probably figured out. So we welcome data, insights, and suggestions that you think have potential for feeding into that. And we'll invite you to consider a few questions Lucas will put up on the screen. And feel free to get in touch with us after the fact, or perhaps it might raise some thoughts for you now. And these kinds of questions are: what type of energy efficiency topics would you like to see the IEA looking at? What types of indicators would you like to see? And what are other ways that the IEA could be evaluating energy efficiency progress? And of course, data sources we're always very happy to hear about for future analysis. So with that, I think it's over to our moderator, Ed. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir,
Great.
we can.
Good. I know we have some questions already, so I'm going to hold back on my questions. Raphael, you're still on? You had a few questions you want to ask right now?
Sure. It mostly has to do with better understanding the public funding behind the energy efficiency changes we're seeing, and how much is being done by private industry and customers themselves outside of the public programs. I suspect that there's a lot more activity just from reading BNEF type reports, that there's a lot more going, and it speaks to the leverage that public efforts have. They've created a marketplace, they've created a human capacity, institutional capacity, and have set also goals. And you see industry and private citizens uptaking energy efficiency as a result of things that were done in the past, for example, codes and standards. And just to get a sense of how much more are we getting from the small public spend, because the public spend gets a lot of scrutiny, and yet it is instrumental in oiling this bigger machinery of energy efficiency worldwide. And I would love to see some analysis of that, because public spend is always being questioned. And showing that a dollar spent in public efforts leads to $400, let's say, of investment outside of public efforts would be a nice way to support the work of public institutions and governments. And that's one of my question.
Renee, would you like to respond, or Lucas?
I think I'll handball this one to Lucas. I'm sure he's ready to and willing to answer that.
I need to dig in my memory now for the investment numbers. But perhaps to first give some context as to how much investment there is globally in end-use related investments. So that comes from both the private sector, but also households, but also government, as you rightly point out. I think that in 2025, it was around 770 billion, close to 800 billion globally. And that's quite an increase from before. So I think in the year before, in 2024, it was around 730 billion. So already an increase of around 6-7% in 2025. And if we compare that then to sort of 2019 levels, so that's usually the comparison that we've made in the report. So around 6 years ago, I think it was around 500 billion. So you really see a step up in investment and energy efficiency in recent years. We saw a jump in 2022, in particularly in public investment during the energy crisis, when government started investing in energy efficiency as a way to lower prices for consumers. So that's the first thing. Like investment in energy efficiency has grown in recent years in different sectors. And then the second point, which you touched upon, I think is a very interesting one of like, where is that money coming from? I think the answer is that it differs per sector. I think for the building sector, one thing that we've analyzed is that an actually large share of the investment comes from households directly. And indeed, in many cases, that's leveraged by public funds, meaning that public funds might fund a share of the retrofit that is being done, let's say through a grant of around 30% or something, and the rest is then funded by the household itself. So in the building sector, you see that around 70% of investment is coming from households, and the rest is by private companies and government. In the transport sector, then, on the other hand, I think we see a slightly larger share coming from government, but also a larger share coming from industry, because of course it's not just passenger vehicles being bought, but also companies buying vehicles for their own operations. So their households, I think, are around half of the investment, and the rest is coming from industry and government. And then lastly, in the industrial sector, of course, there's no investment from households, and it's all from government and industry. But I think there we still see quite a lot of support from government in the total investment numbers. So I don't remember on top of my head. It is in the report somewhere or in last year's report, but I think it's around 40% coming from government and the rest coming from industry. However, having said that, in tracking investment numbers, it's always difficult to look at the industrial sector, because a lot of investment might not be something that we can accurately see, because sometimes it's off balance sheet. But I think in general, in energy efficiency, which is different compared to some other sectors, there's a lot of investment coming from households directly, which is often being leveraged by government policies. I'll stop there and hope that answered your question, but otherwise I'll look into more details and can follow up with you afterwards.
Sure, would love to, because I do see a lot of pressure always on, any public spend is questionable, and even more in energy efficiency, which is invisible, because you're always going against a counterfactual that you're inventing. It's an estimate of what would have happened. And so it gets so much scrutiny, and evaluation is always put to the task of finding that counterfactual, of finding that baseline that we can't see and we can't really predict in an ever more confusing world of DERs and other things that are going on right in this field. So yes, I appreciate you looking into that. Thank you.
Thanks, Rafi. I didn't see any other questions in the chat, but if there's somebody on the call now who has a question, please unmute yourself and ask the question.
I have a follow-on question. Hi, Ari Reeves with CLASP. I was wondering if you could say something, Lucas, about how you count. I know I can read your methodology document, but how do you count the public and private investments in energy efficiency when a piece of equipment or an appliance is purchased? Is some portion of that purchase cost attributed to or counted as an energy efficiency investment while the remainder of it is not? It's just, you need a piece of equipment or an appliance.
Yeah, it's a very, very good question, and indeed, we're getting into quite the details of the investment
Sure.
methodologies. But I think in many cases, it's indeed a portion of the investment, and sometimes it's the
Okay.
incremental investment. So the sort of the premium paid for efficient products in some technologies, and particularly in industry. So what we don't want to do is count, let's say, an entire vehicle bought as an efficiency investment, but it's the
Sure.
difference with an ICE vehicle. So in many cases, it's the incremental investment. However, we're now reviewing that methodology because, as you can imagine, with prices for efficient technologies such as electric vehicles in this example going down compared to ICEs, it becomes harder to measure. If that increment drops, that doesn't mean that there's less investment. It just means that prices have become more competitive. So that's something that we're specifically evaluating for this year. I know also for our World Energy Investment Report, which is coming out somewhere in June. But it's a good question.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds challenging.
Okay.
I'll also comment that can I make one
Go
other
ahead.
comment?
Go ahead.
We're looking at CLASP, we're looking at creating a set of appliance efficiency indicators, kind of modeled after what you've done for efficiency more broadly. And it would be great to connect with one or both of you to see whether there's whether some subset of what you've done we could kind of reproduce, obviously with credit to the IEA, and where we can add on to that, and whether maybe some of what we add on could then in turn be taken back and taken up by the IEA.
Absolutely. Very, very happy to. So I think Renee shared the general email address, but otherwise my email address is just first name, last name with a dot in between at iea.org.
Okay.
You'll be able to reach me as well.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks, Ari. Yeah, I have one question which will probably need another half hour, but we'll have you have an abbreviated response. The headlines here are data centers and how much energy data centers will be using. How are you looking at data centers? How much energy is using? The role of energy efficiency and renewables with data centers? Because it's for many reasons, it's sort of as I said, the bright headlines here that people are talking about. I wonder how the IEA is responding to that. And that's for Lucas.
Thank you for clarifying. I was hoping that Renee had the perfect answer ready, but
well, she's more than, but I think she would ask you. So.
No, but it's a good question. Data centers, and I think, of course, it's an issue or it's a topic that's not the center of discussion in all countries, but in some countries it's a very big part of the discussion. So here in Europe, for example, I know that in Ireland and Luxembourg, for example, where many data centers are, it's a big part of electricity demand growth and is expected to be a big part of energy demand growth in the future as well. And I think the way we're looking at it is on two sides. On the one hand, it's what is the energy consumed by data centers, and what are the sort of efficiency solutions that can be applied in data centers to limit that energy demand. So how much is it contributing to energy demand growth? And in that sense, just like in cooling, we see just growth in electricity demand, which in turn has its effect on efficiency progress globally. So that's the one thing. On the other hand, as you also pointed out, it's the solutions that for example, artificial intelligence that is running in these data centers can bring to efficiency is also a very interesting area. And we see that in industry, for example, in energy management solutions, these are being more and more implemented and are generating real energy savings. So what we're trying to do here is we have our digital team. It's called 3DEN. The abbreviation is digitally demand-driven electricity networks. But one thing that they specifically look at is what is this sort of value that AI can bring to energy efficiency, but likewise, what are the energy costs or the energy demands brought by data centers, and what is the balance there? So that's something that's developing rapidly here at the IEA, both in our team and in other teams, but definitely an area that will continue exploring.
Good. Yeah, and I think what can I say? It should be a highlight in your next report because I have a feeling it will be. But okay, well, I want to thank everyone here, our presenters. We're nearing the end of the hour, and I appreciate people participating. And I'm going to hand this off to Nazir, and you have some concluding remarks as well.
Thank you, Ed. Thanks, Lucas and Rennie, for the very insightful presentation and discussions. Thanks to our participants as well, and for the very engaging discussion and questions at the end. I have put a couple of links in the chat box. The important one is your feedback. We will be really happy to get your feedback, suggestions on this webinar, and any other areas of interest that you would like to for us to organize webinars, or if you want to be part of the webinars as speakers, feel free to reach out to us. I have also provided a link to our YouTube channel, our LinkedIn page, and to the resources section of our website. You can find presentations from conferences, from previous webinars, and the summary notes and slides from the previous webinars on our website as well. Take a look. With that, we would like to call it a day. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day and evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next time, we will have a webinar, more coming.